thesis is that since we have delegated the ability to read context to contextual technologies such as social media, location, and sensors, we have become context blind. And since context blindness, or katextia in Latin, is one of the most dominant symptoms of autistic behavior, people with autism may be giving us a peek into our future human condition. Phenomena such as cancel culture, trigger warnings, and safe spaces may be early signs of this. With increasingly frequent floods and fires and unbearably hot summers, the human footprint on our planet should be evident to all. But it is not because we are context blind. We are witnessing evolution in real time and birthing of our successor species. Our great-grandchildren may very well be new species distinct from us, the Homo katextus. Everyone, please welcome Dr. Eva Berger.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think I'm fine with this mic, so I don't know who this one goes to. Okay. Buenas tardes. Así contestan cuando es en español. Bueno, con el permiso de Fernando, voy a hablar en inglés porque me es mucho más fácil. Yo soy originalmente de México, pero me fui a los 15 años y no he vivido aquí desde entonces y todos mis estudios fueron en inglés, entonces prefiero hablar en inglés, prometo hacerlo lo más claro y lento posible. Estoy agradecidísima a Fernando por esta invitación para poder presentar las ideas en mi nuevo libro y estoy todavía más contenta de anunciar que el libro saldrá en español a principios del próximo año, así que espero puedan leerlo si están interesados en ello. Como dijo Fernando, las preguntas con mucho gusto las pueden preguntar en español y yo prometo tratar de contestar en español y máximo en Spanglish, ¿ok? Entonces empiezo. Every era, some of it you have heard because it's sort of the explanation of what the book is about, but every era in human history has a defining disease. And the language used around it defines the response of patients and society to that disease. The illness itself then becomes a metaphor to describe unrelated social processes and cultural phenomena that resemble the symptoms or the stigma of the disease. For example, due to the physical disfigurement that accompanies leprosy, lepra, the sick suffered humiliation and segregation, and the word leper became synonymous with an outcast or a pariah. Disease is the metaphorical source for psychological states too. We can be lovesick. We buy things we don't need because nobody is immune to advertising. And unexceptional events are like the common cold, right? We talk about laughter or riots as contagious, and we draw parallels between the spreading of germs and the spreading of ideas. We use the metaphor of contagion, algo que es contagioso, to describe the spread of ideas within social networks in the real world and online. We also speak about viral memes and posts, and since COVID-19, we really understand what viral means. Every generation has a defining physical or psychological illness. The rise in popularity of reality television, and with it, the quest for instant celebrity, made narcissistic personality disorder the diagnosis of the moment. Then came OCD, ADD, bipolar, and borderline. And today, autistic and Asperger's are the most quoted and loosely used terms by laypersons to describe, often in a demeaning manner, the socially awkward ex-spouse, the friendless child, or the abusive boss. This use of the term autism is, of course, unfair to those indeed afflicted by the condition. Because when it becomes a slur, you know what a slur is? Un insulto, right? When saying to someone, what are you, autistic, right? When it becomes a slur, it leads to stereotyping and to the misunderstanding of the challenges and needs that autistic people must face. I do not use it as an insult, of course not. Autism just seems to me to be the most useful metaphor to describe the human condition at the start of the third decade of the 21st century. Okay? Autismo como metáfora. One of the most dominant manifestations of autistic behavior is context blindness, or catextia in Latin, ceguera contextual. I do not claim that context blindness for all humans is the same as the medically diagnosed context blindness of children with Asperger's or autism. But the descriptions of autistic behaviors often speak of a child sitting expressionless, constantly spinning the wheels of a toy car, his eyes fixed. He pays no attention to when his name is called, oblivious to the situation around him. It seems to me that if we replace the toy truck with a smartphone, this is a description of most of us today, right? Completely concentrated on the phone and not what is going on alrededor de nosotros en nuestra vida real. Catextia affects abilities such as face perception, recognition of emotions, understanding language and communication, and problem solving. And as it turns out, many of these are affected in neurotypical people as well. A study conducted by UCLA, La Universidad de California, found that digital media decreased children's ability to read other people's feelings. Social skills require practice, and we had been low on this practice for a while when the pandemic struck. We were looking at our phones, get this, an average of 96 times daily in 2019, but most of our conversations, obviously in 2020, took place behind a screen, and chances are that our ability to socialize in person has been even further compromised. With muted screens on Zoom, you all know what I'm talking about, we have become used to an unnatural silence and absence of conversation fillers. Conversation fillers son cosas como right? Or you don't hear that on Zoom. It's silent until somebody opens your mic, you're heard, then it's turned off again. Online activities multiplied with COVID-19, raising multiple questions about reading situations and understanding context. I remember how amazed I felt during the first few weeks of remote teaching and faculty meetings by Zoom at what seemed to be, to me, misread situations by students and even some of my colleagues. Sentí que lo que estaba pasando es que la gente, estudiantes y profesores, no estaban leyendo el contexto de cosas apropiadamente. For example, a colleague of mine took part in a committee meeting while at the same time conducting an unrelated meeting at his real-world office. His microphone was off and his phone camera was to his side, showing his low-angle profile as he faced his desktop. I have known this colleague to be a very nice, well-mannered professor for very many years, but he was blind to the new context and insensitive to the lack of interest in his coworkers that he was projecting. He was politely asked by the dean through private chat to turn off his camera. A black square somehow felt less insulting, okay? Like me, professors worldwide, and I'm sure all of you guys, have experienced a screen filled with black boxes for months teaching remotely. We all know the weird and unsettling experience of talking to the black squares without any visual feedback, to know, as we know from gestures and micro cues in a physical classroom, whether someone seems confused or someone is bored or something needs to be repeated. To this, one can add the closed microphones, the limited audio feedback, the unnatural pauses, the need to monitor participation and amplify one person at a time, and the artificial silence that requires some getting used to. Remote teaching is an entirely different situation from teaching in person in a classroom. It is a new context that revealed how contextually insensitive many of us are. Insensitivos al contexto. We know how hard it is to spend hours and concentrate in front of a computer. This is even before the pandemic. There's even a term for it now, Zoom fatigue, right? Granted, I understand and I agree, it can be difficult to prime ourselves to psychologically for work or for school from home. We are not used to interacting formally at home. Students hold themselves together more or less respectfully in a class, whereas at home, the environment sends us mixed messages as to what is proper, es apropiado, okay? The situation of a class is a formal one, but at home, the problem is we're too comfortable. Still, and this is experiences that I've had, to attend class with a camera on, lying in bed, under the covers. Did you guys ever do that? No, no, demasiado educados. Is to be context blind. Over 2.5 years since the beginning of the pandemic, some people are finding face-to-face conversations awkward and less fluid, and their online behavior is leaking into their real lives. The social distancing of and wearing of face masks imposed by the pandemic may turn out, and there are already some preliminary studies on this, may turn out to have negative implications for babies and their bonding, early attachment, and connections with others. It is much harder to read people's emotions behind masks. And if we can't read other people's emotions, empathy deteriorates as well. The eroded contextual sensitivity that seems to be afflicting us all explains at least some of the lack of empathy we have seen around us over the past few years. When we're blind to context, we cannot be civil, educados, bien comportados, as we don't have the context, cultural or social, to serve as a guide for what is acceptable and what is not when we play a certain role in a given situation, right? In a classroom, you're playing the role of student. The moment you step out, you're playing the role of friend to your friends that you're talking to. The situation is different, the setting is different, the objects around you are different, and that tells you what role you're playing right now of the big menu of different roles that we all have, right? And so we have stopped understanding those situations or those contexts. Sorry. Okay. Context blindness is useful for understanding what is called alternative facts. You've heard this phrase? Yes? Alternate factos alternativos? Or, okay. I don't know if this is like an American thing or this is something that is used here as well. A phrase that in any case, in other times, would have been regarded as an oxymoron, but flourishes when opinion reigns and there is no backdrop against which to judge reality. If you don't have a context, you don't know what's true, what's not, you know, relativity goes rampant. Okay. When there's no shared context, what aboutism? Another term that I'm not sure that they are familiar with. What aboutism? Alguien quiere discutir con nosotros de algún tema nos dice alguna cosa y en lugar de responder al punto del que están hablando, les contestamos con, sí, pero en este otro país pasa diferente. What about this other thing? Cambiando el tema, right? What about this other thing? This is very common nowadays and it didn't used to be. So whataboutism becomes very popular and the both sides argument replaces rational debate. There's strong evidence all around us that we have now slipped into an unprecedented reality in most areas of life. My argument in the book and here tonight presumes an all-encompassing grasp of our current human condition. Here's the point, that digital technology has made us context blind. It's that simple. Saqué mucho aire para decir algo tan sencillo, ¿no? Pero había que llegar de alguna manera a eso. There are many phenomena that are easier to grasp if we think of them as stemming from context blindness. Explica muchas cosas. Se convierte como en una explicación que, oh, that makes sense, okay? For example, because we're context blind, we can't see the gap between the calls for improving sex and gender identity, equity, and inclusion, right? Calling for all genders to be equal and to have equal rights on the one side, and the popularity of, stupid gender reveal parties. Do you know what this is? I actually, when I was preparing for this talk, this is rampant in America or in the United States, but I thought maybe Mexicans are, you know, smarter. I know they are. But you have these parties. Fiestas de revelación de género del bebé. It's a girl. Okay. Maybe you think it's, all right. Okay. Context blindness clarifies the over-celebration of life events generally, when the most important part of an event is that it can be uploaded and shared on social media. Weddings and receptions are not enough. They are now surrounded by engagement parties, bachelor weekends, bridal party lunches, rehearsal dinners, pre-wedding bar nights, and after-wedding couples showers. As if the stretching of traditional celebrations weren't enough, there are now celebrations of actions that were once not regarded as events at all. They used to be the actions that led to the events. Por ejemplo, asking someone to the prom. Now there are parties and they are called promposals or postpartum parties. When all of life is a sequence of pseudo events made to be shared on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok, pets' birthdays, divorces, and even job departures are occasions for a party. I don't know if you guys are like this, but from my experience, students in conversation used to change their language and adjust their tone and demeanor when a professor walked into the room. If you were having a friendly conversation that young people have, when the professor walked into the room, you sort of straightened up and you change your language or you lower your voice, right? There are certain things that happen in certain situations. This doesn't happen anymore. Students even continue their private, sometimes very intimate conversations, phone conversations, from the stalls they entered at the school bathrooms where I teach. Even when they walked in and they saw me washing my hands. Está tirando al novio y yo estoy escuchando. Right? This didn't used to happen. Okay. In one of my classes, a student walked in late and holding balloons in her hand, encouraged everyone to join her singing happy birthday to some other girl along with her, oblivious to the fact that class had started. This was once regarded as improper socialization, but now situations are ambiguous. It is even hard to be mad at such students. You guys grew up in undefined, unlabeled situations. Unlike the student from the 70s, that Neil Postman, the famous scholar in communication, he wrote that in the 80s that he missed a student from the 70s who was reading a newspaper in class, but covered it with a course textbook. He missed this guy because this student obviously understood the definition of a class and knew that certain behaviors did not fit the situation. His covering it up he wasn't lying. He was being nice, actually. It was a sign of respect and good manners and of awareness to context. Class textbooks are more and more now electronic, and they cannot serve as covers for media that belong in another context. Textbooks are consumed in class through the same laptop, through the same screen that not only serves as a notebook and pen to take notes, but also as the same window that connects students to their social rather than academic situations. I like to walk up and down my classrooms just because I'm hyper, but also because I like to see what they're doing on their computers. They're on TikTok, they're on Instagram, they're all over the place. I don't say anything, by the way. I don't. They may be, all these students may be in a classroom physically, but their presence psychologically, mentally, is on Instagram or elsewhere in the metaverse. Okay. At my college, at the end of one of the COVID waves, students who had been vaccinated were encouraged to come back to campus. And, we continued to Zoom the lectures for those who needed to stay home still. After one girl came back, she was vaccinated. After pointing out how exciting it was for her to be back in the physical classroom, that young woman proceeded to spend the remainder of our meeting looking at her phone, never picking up her eyes, not once, to look at her friends, to look at the screen, to look at the whiteboard, to look at me. But she was really excited to be back. Okay. The changes in people's behavior have been happening for quite some time. I remember very vividly feeling deeply hurt by an experience I had when mobile phones were just starting to become popular. I was on my way to a meeting in Tel Aviv, that's where I live. I parked the car and started walking in the direction of what I thought was the address I needed. As it turned out, I was in the wrong area. Still very excited about having found a parking spot in a city where finding a parking spot is like winning the lottery. I decided not to move the car and to walk. But there wasn't anybody around. I got confused. Nobody was around to ask. And all of a sudden I saw a woman turning the corner of a very, a small street, talking on the phone. Using every possible gesture to project politeness, I stopped her and beginning with the word disculpe, right? Excuse me for bothering you, right? I asked for directions. She stopped. She said, hold on, to the person on the other side of the line. And with a palpable anger, she was ready to kill me. With a palpable anger, said, no, I can tell you how to get there. Can't you see I'm on the phone? Okay. And she walked away. It was not until much later that, as often happens to me, I thought of what I should have answered. You can imagine what I thought I should have answered. As she was walking away, if you stopped and put your phone away from your ear, why not use those 27 seconds to help me rather than lecture me, right? That's what I should have said. I didn't. At that moment, all I could do was pull myself together and look for another human being to ask. It was not until I used the story to illustrate a point in class that I could see the event for what it was, a sign of the changing definition of public space. Espacio público used to be defined by the fact that you can talk to strangers. That's almost what it was defined by. The only place almost where it was okay to talk to a stranger, to ask for directions, to say what time it is it, right? That definition was changing. And I was now intruding in her conversation that she was having in what is a street, public, okay? It was the beginning of the final delegation of orientation in space to Waze and Google Maps, or also of the entrustment of human interaction to smartphones and social media. Now we are so happy today because now we can ignore everyone in the world, look at our phone and act annoyed if the cashier, for example, at a supermarket, if there still is one, because many supermarkets don't have cashiers anymore, dares talk to us as she moves our groceries along. We can ignore everyone at the train station and not interrupt our games or tweets or whatever it is that we're doing. We can walk and text and disregard completely the context that we are in. So context, what is context, right? Maybe it's time to define it. Context is a set of conditions involving space, time, objects, symbols, and transactions between people, culture, and reality. The conditions are functions of one another and of the media through which they are conducted, and they allow us to label the situations we find ourselves in. Es lo que nos ayuda a entender cómo se llama la situación. Es situación que se llama clase, okay? Es situación que se llama fiesta, situación que se llama rezo, right? Okay. The conditions help us predict how others will behave and the expectations that they have of us. Situations or contexts assign us roles. They tell us who we are and who are the others around us. Context helps us concentrate on what is relevant and ignore what is irrelevant and make sense of the world. It is that important. And when we're context blind, we cannot. What is a nice birthday present for a good friend? What do you do when a bell rings? What do you put in your suitcase when you go traveling? Of course, you can probably all answer each of these questions. But what if you were asked to give the one and only correct answer? You would probably reply, depende, right? A nice birthday present for one of your friends could be quite inappropriate for another. The bell may be a signal to remove the cake from the oven, go to your next class, or exit a building because of a fire, o un temblor, o un simulacro. What you pack in your suitcase depends on the destination and length of your journey. A correct answer for all of these questions depends on the situation. And another word for situation is context. We can tell the difference between a sincere and a polite smile, right? Cuando nos sonríen por ser así educados y cuando es verdadera la sonrisa. Or recognize words before they are fully spoken out because we're sensitive to context. Nothing that we perceive has an absolute meaning. Tears can mean sadness, but also happiness, relief, or just that you're making onion soup. When we're in the middle of a crosswalk, a red light doesn't mean stop anymore. It means hurry up, right? Context. Context influences the meaning of what we perceive. It helps us focus on what is relevant and to ignore what is irrelevant. It helps us make sense of vague, incomplete, or ambiguous information. We use context to understand the behaviors and the minds of others and to make sense of the world, to make it predictable. So what's making us context blind? Well, when skills and capacities are delegated to technology, they are lost. I had a chemistry teacher in middle school here in Mexico, where I grew up, who did not allow us to to take notes or copy anything off the blackboard, we found the rule weird and unnerving. It was, after all, chemistry and not, let's say, literature, right? Formulas and not stories. We protested, but to no avail. Apparently, he knew something about the effects of technology on humans, the effect of writing on human memory, right? He understood, even if intuitively, that when we take notes in class or copy from the board, we're postponing the remembering stage to a later date. The lecture goes from the teacher to the students' ears, their writing hands, and then their notebooks, bypassing their brains, waiting for the final exam to go from the notebook or laptop to the eyes, to the hand, to the exam, and then to Neverland, to oblivion. Not having written anything down then, I still know the periodic table by heart in Spanish, 42 years later. ¿Me creen? Hidrógeno, litio, sodio, potasio, rubidio, cesio y francio, berilio, magnesio, calcio, stroncio, bario y radio, boro, aluminio y fierro. I could go on, it's boring. Unless I am ever on something like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, and I do, I don't have much use for it in my personal or professional life, but the fact that I know it serves as an illustration of one of the most central effects that writing had on humans, the deterioration of our memories, right? When you can write it down, you don't need to remember it. Students in ancient Greece knew whole chunks of La Iliada y la Odisea because they had no choice. The invention of writing weakened our biological memory. Rational thought was impaired with the advent of television and the delegation of our capacity to read context to what are called contextual technologies, así se llaman, tecnologías contextuales, atrophied our contextual sensitivity. When digital brain skills increase, human brain skills decrease until the unused capacities melt away entirely and we cannot run them autonomously. The advent, so that you understand what I'm talking about, the advent of automated airplanes or airplane operation weakened pilots' abilities to respond creatively in emergencies. Doctors who rely entirely on technology are increasingly losing their ability to make diagnosis based on observation. The physical exam is almost a lost art. And as a famous doctor and writer called Abraham Verghese half-jokingly said, if you come to our hospital missing a finger, no one will believe you until we get a CT scan, an MRI, and an orthopedic consult. But here, look, I don't have a finger. And it isn't just pilots and doctors, but all of us. Think about it. Why perform the basic arithmetic required for splitting a check at a coffee shop or calculating the tip for a waiter at a restaurant if we can use the calculator on our phones? Why tell time by the hands of an analog watch if we can quickly look at our phones? Why remember birthdays when our calendars and social media accounts remember them for us? They even provide a no effort template to say, oh dear, happy birthday, and move on. No effort whatsoever. Why retain the ability to give instructions if we can send directions to Waze instead? When GPS decides what route is best and iTunes decides what song to play, humans forget how to contextualize. When we completely outsource all of our skills to mobile technology, location services, sensors, social media, artificial intelligence, we stop understanding the most basic situations. To relinquish control over our decisions to contextual technology is to give up our awareness of context. When we live so much of our social lives on social media, we forget how to behave in the real world. We have become really good at distinguishing nuances of emotion between a smiling emoji, a grinning face, a beaming face with smiling eyes, a face with tears of joy, or rolling on the floor laughing. Nuances of smile, bigger smile, right? In the physical world, our sensitivities have coarsened. Walking on the street, it has become one's job to evade those walking with their eyes on their phones, not experiencing life, too busy documenting and uploading it to Instagram and walking into elevators before letting others out. Tethered to our mobile devices. We may be physically present in a situation like now. I can tell who's here also mentally and who is mentally and emotionally elsewhere. I'm watching you. Before the internet, a place was made up of physical space and the people within it. Today, the places we physically inhabit have become invisible to us. Doesn't matter where we are, right? As long as there's Wi-Fi and electricity. They have ceased to provide context for our interactions because we're all physically present, but have fixed our attention on the absent and the remote. Sitting with a friend at a coffee shop or with our family over dinner, we text and swipe and look at our phones instead of at them. We no longer feel insulted when we're talking to someone and they take their eyes off of ours to look at their phones. What they're doing really is leaving us. They're putting us on hold. My son actually signaled it one time, not with a phone, but I was like lecturing, like mothers do. Right? And he went like this in the air. Well, of course, he went to his room and there was plenty of stuff going on. But this is what we do with our phones. Nobody sends us to our rooms. We just take our eyes off of the person that we're talking to and we go away. We go away somewhere else. Lack of eye contact has become the norm in real life. But online, we're apparently uncomfortable. So, since its iOS 13 update to FaceTime, Apple has been experimenting with faking eye contact and altering our faces so that it looks like we're looking directly at the other person all the time. On social media, we live in a mix of disparate social situations, friends from various social circles and periods of life. It's been called context collapse. And social media also contribute to our context blindness due to the volume of information and the extreme and disturbing content their algorithms encourage. There's a growing call upon social media companies to take responsibility for offensive and violent content on their platforms. These companies are trying to develop policies and automated systems to manage extreme content and regulate what is allowed and what is deleted from their platforms, but they haven't really been very successful at it. Facebook, for example, I don't know if you know this, processes 1.3 million posts per minute. And as described in a story on Vice, it employs thousands of content moderators who have about 10 seconds to decide whether a post flagged by a user is offensive or violent. They can ignore it, escalate it, meaning send it to a manager, or delete it. According to the Vice story, moderators do not last very long on the job, and some of them suffer from anxiety and estrés post-traumático. This is unsurprising, of course, not only based on the volume of the posts that are required to handle, their content and their tone, that's horrible in itself, but also based on the post's lack of context and the absence of context in the instructions for judging them. For example, Holocaust denial is covered by free speech in the United States, but is illegal in 14 countries, only 4 which have actively taken up the matter with Facebook: Germany, France, Austria, and Israel. One cannot threaten heads of state, as they are regarded as a protected category, but it is okay to threaten anyone else. Animal abuse is allowed by the rules, right? as is child abuse, as long as the images are not sexual and the moderator doesn't deem them as having been shared with sadism and celebration. An abused child is okay, but a sadistically abused child is not. Videos of violent deaths are allowed, but are to be marked as disturbing, supposedly to protect minors. The live streaming of suicide attempts is allowed, as long as the video is deleted once the person has either died or been saved. The instructions for moderating sex seem equally arbitrary. Handmade art showing nudity and sex is allowed, but digitally made art is not, regardless of the actual pornographic content of either. What is the logic behind these instructions? In what context is non-sexual child abuse acceptable? On Facebook, it apparently is. And when so much of our lives happen there, the conventions of the social network gradually spill over into the real world, and we become context blind. But it's not just social media that is making us context blind. Other technologies are also to blame. They are called contextual technologies. I share the concerns of many regarding our loss of privacy or the financial motives of businesses when technology knows everything from our geographic location to our purchasing habits and even our stress level. However, I think that our context blindness is more disturbing and more worrisome. The point I am trying to make in my book is that the danger is not that the technology knows what we want, but that it knows what we may not even realize that we want for lack of context to recognize it. We love technology because it is contextual and serves as our guide, dog, or cane, but it is our reliance on it that is making us context blind. You want to give me a cue? Am I short of time? Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to move. I'm going to tell you a few things just to show you some of the examples of the technologies that are responsible for making us context blind. Auto sin conductor, navegador GPS, inteligencia artificial, sensores, tecnologías vestibles, wearables, right? All of these are the technologies that, since they do things instead of us, are making us context blind. Why is it not moving? Okay, so GPS, we can move forward without expanding too much on it. I don't know how much you know about something called GPT-3, but it makes human speech that sounds as human as humans. It's incredible. It's crazy how human it sounds. There are also what are called tecnologías conversacionales, right? Siri, for example. But not only. There's also something called assignable reminders, recordatorios asignables, where this app has a list of the things that the family has to do, and whoever's closest to the laundry or the cleaners is reminded to pick up the laundry. And now they have added, it also says thank you, so we are free to not even say thank you. You understand that what happens is that we end up in real life not remembering to say thank you and giving orders like we do to Siri, right? The symptoms of our context blindness are fragilidad e hipersensibilidad, personalidad de alto conflicto y delirios. Todas son metáforas, okay? I was going to talk about, but the book does, if you end up reading it, about flat earthers, right? And anti-vaxxers and all kinds of things. I like the images that I put for each one of them. That's how fragile generations are, right? You're going home soon. Okay. Without the ability to contextualize, there is much more humans cannot see. We cannot see that we're driving our own evolution with our technology. We have redesigned our world become an ever more domesticated and smarter species, but also generated explosions in allergies, obesity, autism, and global warming. Last summer, it became, es la última. Last summer, it became clear that we have pushed the planet past its final tipping point. It was hotter in the eastern United States than in Pakistan. London got more than a month's worth of rain in a few minutes. There were unprecedented rains followed by deadly flooding in central China and whole areas of Germany, drought in North America, and wildfires in the subarctic. California was burning again. Temperatures in Canada reached 50 degrees. Finland and Ireland experienced tropical heat, and the Siberian tundra was ablaze. This is global warming we can feel, actually feel. It's not a theory. With our instruments, our media, our technology, we have mastered more and more of our environment and guided it toward our own purposes. The human footprint on our planet should be evident to all, but it is not, because we're context blind. Last paragraph. In his book called Amazing Ourselves to Death, a great professor called Lance Strait explains that the key to avoiding technological dystopia is context. That we need to find the appropriate context for the specific purposes that we have in mind, the appropriate medium for the kinds of communication we wish to engage in, the appropriate environment for living a fully human life. I agree, of course, but I fear it may be too late. Sorry por pesimista. Thank you so much. If we have time. Okay.
Get some questions.
Okay.
We have some time to get some questions. The people who are in Zoom, they can use the microphone of the chat. And here, just raise your hand. Yes. Okay. First, the second, and the third, and then the fourth. Okay. Plenty.
I like
questions.
it already.
Okay. Just wait up a minute because we have to use the microphone.
Como prefieran. Ah.
Now I see my nephew using a smartphone at 4 years old, using YouTube and TikTok. Do you think there will be a bigger distraction or something similar on next generations?
That's a very good question. What is your name? Juan Paulo. Gracias. I think one of the things that is clearest is that what we used to call our generation was traditionally 25 years. 25 years was like the classic definition of what a generation is. Entre mis abuelos, mis padres, yo, mis hijos, 25 años. The word generation now connotes something very different. You know, what is the next generation of iPhones? It takes 6 months before yours is passé and it's no good anymore. Right? And the point you raise is a very important one. I have students who tell me they thought that they were, you know, there was a generational gap between them and their parents. They now say there's a generational gap between them and their younger siblings. As you said, you see them naturally, almost intuitively, you know. I used to have to explain to my mother, here, put your hand on the mouse and left click when you get to something, and see when you move here, it moves on the screen at the same time. And it was hard for her to understand. When I tried it with my firstborn, I said, when it was time to do it, I said, sit down here. You see, put your hand here. I said, okay. He pushed my hand away. It was intuitive. It's as if generations are born with, here's the deal. since I talk about evolution, and this is not a joke, I mean, I take it to an extreme, of course, but Chris Nystrom, who was another professor of mine, used to say that future generations will walk around like this, that they will have only 2 fingers, this and this, and they will walk around like this. Why? Because the right side of the brain is the only one we use these days. It's going to be heavier. We don't need the left one, so we'll be walking around like this. And why these 2 fingers? Because we never use these. This is for the remote control, and this is for swiping. Evolutionarily, it's a point well taken, right? I'm not sure if this will happen, although evolutionarily speaking, this has happened before. You know, some babies, a certain percentage of babies are born with an extra vertebrae, like a little tail. It's nothing. It's, you know, it's operated on the first day after they're born. But these are evolutionary reminders of when we had a tail because we needed it and it went away. So this thing that Chris Nystrom said once may happen. I think my generation is going to miss you guys when it comes to the next generation. If your professors complain about, these young people, I, by the way, I think you're amazing generations. You're just different, and we're going to have to stop being boomers and understand in which ways we can learn from you. But it's certain, from my point of view, that it's accelerated. It's not like a regular pace and the next generation 25 years later or even 10 years later. It happens with every new generation of iPhones, with every new app and every new possibility and every new algorithm that helps us do certain things that the previous generation had to do by themselves.
Well, my question is that you believe that this disease, context blindness, has been developed by the fact that, especially with technology arising and evolving as it has been in our society, if it's also because of the anxiety of multitasking and the need of doing so, and this basically fear of missing out, disability that has basically created this content blindness that we aren't capable even of stopping to do 2 things at once, and especially in this post-pandemic time.
You have amazing students. These are great questions. If I understand you, what is your name? Manuel? Okay. If I understand your question properly, you think I'm being a little bit too deterministic, you know, that technological determinism, right? You're asking me, is it technology the way you presented it? Or perhaps it's multitasking and all of these things that we invent. And what I want to say is one is connected to the other. Do you think, okay, here's an example. Do you think workaholism could happen before the invention of the electric bulb or the electric light? Think about how so? Could you be a workaholic when the sun went down and there was no way to have light, but just a candle to get to the bathroom? Or like an oil lamp, right? No, go ahead. No. I'm happy. Es instinto. No, but please do. Okay. This example of, you know, you said multitasking. We love multitasking. By the way, it has a physiological reason. It gives message, you know, this idea that I did so much. We think that, you know, as driving, I took care of that phone call. I answered a few emails. I personally can't stand the little numbers next to the email. I'll answer emails just so that that little number goes away, right? All of these things that you think are perhaps a better explanation for why what's happening is happening are also, from my deterministic point of view, results of technology. Freud has a quote in civilization and its discontents. He talks about his child going away to a different continent and him being very sad to have to say goodbye. And somebody says, don't worry about it. You'll be able to talk to him on the phone. And he says, forget about the phone. I want to meet the person who invented this horrible thing called a boat that's allowing my child to go away. Right? So technology brings about certain things that we all, by the way, usually love. I love them too. If you think I love Waze, I have no idea where I'm going without it. So I love it. I feel lost if I'm losing my battery power and I don't know where I'm going. I like it. I like my music on iTunes or Spotify or wherever it is. I love it. But I think we have to be aware of who it turns us into. And workaholism and multitasking. Don't believe them when they say this is one thing you should tell employers when you go to get a job. I'm really good at multitasking, because what they found one time after another is that multitasking gets a lot of things done, all of them not well enough. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much for being here. I found your lecture fascinating.
Thank you.
And it comes to mind, to me, the question that, is there a chance that rather than becoming blind to our context is changing? That we're just moving on to a new situation where emotional awareness isn't as important, or that social skills aren't as important like before? And is it necessarily a bad thing? I believe it is, or at least it's hard to accept. But what are the implications of this change? And if it's not a blindness, but rather a change of context, where are we heading to as humanity?
That's a very, very, I had never thought about it that way. I believe context is something that that is in us, something people do, right? I believe context is part of our interaction with the world. But it's true that the world is changing. And it's true that probably in that new context, as you call it, my children and their children even more so have a better chance of surviving. Emotional awareness, if it becomes less important, I do think it's a matter of moral judgment. You got me. Oops, caught me. Yes, I do. I feel very strongly about this. I think it's Jonathan Franzen, but I'm not completely sure, so don't quote me on this, that says, since we're going to hell, and in terms of global warming, we're really past the tipping point. We're past the point of coming back or doing certain things, and governments are not doing enough. I mean, we as citizens can do a bunch of things like recycle and eat less beef and do a bunch of things. But, the big problems can be solved only by governments, only by countries. And so Franzen says, since we're, it's a lost case, we might as well think of our local contexts until that terrible doomsday happens. We might as well think of our local context and doing good on the local and temporary level. This is where you should take out your violin and play to my very poetic. I do think it's terrible when we're mean to each other. I don't want to go into politics, but I didn't like Trump very much, I must admit. And the way, for example, he imitated a journalist with a disease, you remember, at the beginning of his presidency, there was like a press conference and a disabled journalist asked a question. And at a rally later on, he was going like him, and he asked me this question. This is the President of the United States. I think we're context blind. This dude was not a possibility once upon a time. And it hurts people, so I think it's a bad thing. You got me. I do have a personal position on this. Thank you for the question. Hola, ay, me quedo aquí. David.
Todos le preguntaron en inglés. Pero,
está bien, está bien.
Quería preguntarle si usted cree que hay una forma de revertir la ceguera o si nada más se puede llegar a ser consciente de esto.
Al nivel personal, al nivel de sociedad, desde el punto de vista de familia, desde el punto de vista de amigos, el contexto chico, cercano, nuestro, sí creo que es reversible. Tengo una amiga, por ejemplo, que pide a todos los hijos y los nietos, cuando llegan a cenar en su casa una vez por semana, el domingo, que pongan los teléfonos a la entrada. Tiene una como canastita y ahí los ponen y los apagan y no los dejan tocar ese teléfono hasta que no acaban. Los niños al principio era como, they were like withdrawal symptoms, but they got used to it. And she says conversation has become amazing. They now talk and the kids love it. They learn to love it. Okay. So on the like small scale, I believe it's reversible when it comes to the lifetime of one smart young person. On the sort of worldwide, universal, philosophical level, I shouldn't say this to young people, but I'm not too optimistic. I think, technology, everybody loves it. Nobody's going to give it up. I think an area in communication called media ecology that I know, you've heard about a little bit, gives us some tools to try to survive this, to try to revert as much as possible. But I'm realistic, and I don't think, world leaders are going to read Neil Postman or McLuhan. Sorry, me voy a ir y van a quedar deprimidos. Hola. Aleida.
Cambiar completamente el contexto, sin embargo, pues nuestro comportamiento se modifica de acuerdo al contexto en el que estamos. Pero esto quiere decir que nos hemos vuelto ciegos al contexto tradicional. Sin embargo, pues también que hemos desarrollado una nueva habilidad de comunicación, donde el contexto en el que nos desenvolvemos principalmente ahora es el digital.
Tienes razón. Tienes razón. Tengo un capítulo en el libro en el cual explico que ni hablar que hay cosas que son increíbles y que se logran ahora que no podíamos soñar sobre ellas, maneras de organizar una demostración para alguna meta importante, ni hablar. Y ustedes viven en esos. Pero evolucionariamente no estamos como wired, programados para comunicarnos con millones de gentes. Empezamos a ser humanos en grupos muy chiquitos y nos quedamos bastante allí mismo. Think of puedo contestar parte en inglés. Think of what a fight is on Facebook. Somebody says you should make a cake and you put 2 eggs. And somebody says, ooh, that recipe sounds amazing. I'm going to try it. And somebody says, I tried it and I added some cinnamon and it came out great. And somebody says, eggs? You mean eggs? Vegans, vegans, don't kill animals, don't eat meat, don't eat eggs. And somebody else tells them what they think about them. And pretty soon we forget it was about a cake at the beginning, right? We don't know how to fight well on media, on social media. We used to be, I never saw my parents fight when I was little. They made a conscious point of not fighting in front of us. It's not like they never fought, they fought. But they decided they were not gonna do it in front of us, me and my sisters, and to put one front in front of us. And I remember I must have been 16 or 17 when they had a silly argument about, I don't know what silly thing. I was sure they were gonna divorce because I saw them fighting for the first time. I had to learn by myself that a good relationship is not fighting, but a good relationship is what comes after reconciliation and knowing how to say I'm sorry and correcting mistakes, right? This cannot happen on social media. It cannot happen on social media. On social media es el paralelo de aventar la puerta y largarse. Because you can. In real life, there are repercussions to doing that. You step out of class y avientas la puerta, goodbye, se fue el semestre, right? So you're amazing on social media, and I see your I wish I could do a lot of the things that you do, and it is true that new context brought about new forms of communication, and you're amazing at it, and some great creativity comes out of it, and some amazing projects, no question about it. It's a different context. And what I'm saying is you don't have to agree with me that it's better or worse. It's going to be very different. It's going to be a species. Did you see, how's that movie called? Like they are fat blurbs moving around in space. Yeah, Wall-E, yes, thank you. Yeah. I'm a good actress. You knew what I was talking about. Let's play charades. Yeah, Wall-E. That's what Wall-E is about. I don't know if you saw it. If you didn't, go ahead and watch it. It's what happens to humans when they don't have to do anything because technology does it for them. They're very good in that new context, but a lot is lost. And the question is, of course, are you sorry for what is lost? I'm going to be long gone, thankfully, when all of those big things actually happen.
Una pregunta más por tiempo. Tratamos de hacer las dos para que las contestan, ¿no? Entonces, rápido y la otra.
Hi, my name is Alfredo. I hope you're feeling welcome in our.
I am, definitely.
And my question is next. Do you think that at a certain point the context blindness can use in the other side? For example, my mom thinks that her students try to play with her, saying that they need more break because they can adapt to the school
After the pandemic.
Okay, I understood. The students are asking for more breaks because the pandemic changed them and they can't concentrate anymore. What the question about it is?
She's thinking that they are playing with her. They are messing around with her.
Okay,
So
she thinks they're being manipulative.
Yes, totally.
Yeah. Tell your mom they are being manipulative, but there's also a point to their inability to concentrate. You should read Neil Postman's book, y fue traducido al español, Amusing Ourselves to Death, and Divirtiéndonos hasta morir. Buenísimo libro. And one of the things that he says there is that even before social media, even before digital technology, Sesame Street, ¿cómo se llama? Plaza Sésamo. That was the beginning of the inability of young people to concentrate, even before your mom's students, because of Zoom. He said before Sesame Street, children, had to come to school and they sat quietly and teachers didn't walk around to keep them amused. They just stood there or sat there. And then came along Sesame Street with items no longer than 30 seconds each, Big Bird has lost his key and he wants to get into the house and he can't, and they're trying to help him cut. And we see a giraffe eating off a tree and cut, and we see this kid singing and cut. Whee, it's amazing. And then they get to kindergarten and the teacher says, okay, everybody, half an hour, story time. Está loca, media hora. Story time. How many items of Sesame Street can be put into half an hour? And they can't sit still. And my generation is surprised that, you know, there's attention deficit disorders and hyperactivity, of course. And that's to your question as well, right? Yeah, children have become very different. You can say it has nothing to do with technology. It isn't television. It's just que no los educan como nos educaban antes. No. Would you rather sit in front of a TV set and watch half an hour of Sesame Street? Sesame Street was a great show in one sense. It delivered on what it promised. They promised they would teach the alphabet and numbers and basic first concepts like here, there, up, down, and the kids learned it. They amazing at it. You know, what we didn't notice, and this is what Postman says, is that between the lines, Sesame Street taught us something else. That learning is always fun, and it comes in bits of 30 seconds at a time. Now, fast forward to social media, personal computers, smartphones, COVID. You know, kids will be manipulative, but something is happening. Things are actually happening. Thank you.
Yes. Hi, I'm Laura.
Hi, Laura.
Thank you a lot for this talk. I have some questions.
Mhm.
You were talking about the hypersensitivity, but at the same time, like face-to-face insensitivity. So that makes me think, like, for example, about the privacy, that sometimes that capitalism has made us think that because it's our car, it's like our part of the street right now,
Mhm.
or it's like our spot and no one can enter your intimacy,
Mhm.
even though you're in a public space.
Mhm.
But at the same time, for example, in the sensitivity things, the intimacy of talking about private things in public has gone like wild, because like nowadays a lot of people talk about like topics that we're not used to talk about it. So it's like, for me, something strange, and that's my question, because like, how is privacy measured, and do you think that sensitivity as well as privacy like burns out, and how can we recuperar, how can we,
Recuperate.
yeah, because there
Sabes inglés increíble.
because there are like so many estímulos, like visual,
Mhm.
like in addition. So there are so many things happening that made us feel like hypersensitive.
Yes, we
But
are.
at the same time, we are losing it. So
Yes, it's a confusing world.
yeah.
It's both things at the same time. It's on the one hand sharing the most intimate things on Facebook for everybody to like, right? And on the other hand, being triggered very easily by a lot of things. You know, in the United States, some companies have started to ask customers if they would like to stop getting announcements about Mother's Day. Because if they already don't have a mother, even if they're 70, maybe it doesn't feel good for them to hear about Mother's Day. If that isn't hypersensitive, you can't post. On the one hand, everybody, like FOMO, right? Everybody's posting things about like this amazing party and this, oh, what a cocktail I had. It was colorful and we went out with friends and we did this and that. But you can't post about cocktails because you don't know how many of your friends are recovering alcoholics. What is your question? How to fix this?
Like
I don't have a solution. Se desgasta completo.
O sea, si ser sensible es como una cualidad, entonces se desgasta. Si nos estamos desgastando,
¿Sí?
¿cómo es posible recuperarse?
No es posible. No, really, I'm not trying to be funny. I think certain things are such large scale that it is only recuperable if you make conscious decisions for your personal life, not as a generation, not as a country, not as a species, but for your personal life. To, for example, have Facebook, but not on the phone. I'm not suggesting you do this. I'm just giving as an example so that not every hour you feel like this need to look what's going on and who's posting and who's doing what. And I say Facebook because I'm old, but you're on Instagram mostly, right? You can make decisions about your own life, like this colleague of mine, of, you know, no phones at the table for dinner. No, I don't use Facebook anymore, but for like really basic professional things. No politics. You know, you can post something and in 3 seconds, you'll be attacked by a mob of tens of people. You're going to be all right because I can see it in your eyes. La tarea. Go home and think what changes you're making to your social media diet. And you'll see how sensitivity se desgasta un poco más lento. Thank you for your question.
Well, thank you very much. Eva, please,
Thank you.
let's give them an applause.
Thank you so much.
We have good reasons to buy your book and to read it.
Oh, I'm so hoping you read it.
No, thank you. And I'm going to ask Josue just to give a certificate this, for you.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you very much, our students from Santa Fe, from Monterrey. Thank you.
Where's their camera? There.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And thank you all guys for your presence. Yeah, if you don't have any problem, I like to have a last picture, but with you here with Eva.
Yay!
Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you so
It's a
much.
very interesting talk.
Thank you.
Very
Thank you. So
interesting.
this is great. Thank you so much. I'm going to put it here. What great students you are.